The summer of 1975 in Brighton was unlike any other. Emma, a 22-year-old young woman, spent her mornings among the books of a small city bookstore, where she worked to save money for college. Her world was made up of words, stories, and dreams known only to her. It was on a bright, sunny day, when she least expected it, that Thomas appeared. He was 23, with eyes that held a restless gleam and hands marked by paint, always seeking to capture the world's beauty on his canvases. Their first exchange of glances was brief, but enough to awaken something in Emma she didn't know was missing. Thomas would come into the bookstore looking for inspiration, or so he said, with a carefree smile. His presence filled the space in a way no one else could. Initially cautious, Emma soon found herself laughing at his exaggerated stories about his travels and the people he'd met. Each afternoon together seemed to stretch until sunset, and their conversations flowed as if they were old friends, not strangers who had met by chance. As the days went by, walks along the beach became routine. Emma revealed her dreams of studying literature, writing, and traveling the world, while Thomas spoke of his desire to exhibit his paintings and be recognized for more than just sketches. Their connection deepened, but Thomas hid something. Emma felt, in moments of silence, that there was a weight in his eyes, as if he were constantly battling thoughts he never shared. One afternoon, as they admired the waves, Thomas took Emma's hand. "Have you ever thought that some things are so good they must be temporary?" His words hung between them, leaving Emma unsettled. She knew he was right but didn't want to admit that summer would end, and with it, perhaps what they had built. Days later, the truth finally emerged. Thomas received news that changed everything. During a routine checkup, a health condition was detected that required treatment in a distant city, something that couldn't be ignored. The discovery shook his world, putting him at a crossroads: leave to get treatment and preserve his life, or stay and risk the consequences. The choice seemed clear, but the pain of farewell was already weighing on him before it was even spoken. Emma noticed something was wrong when Thomas didn't show up for their usual walk. When she finally found him, he was standing with his back to her, staring at the sea with an empty gaze. His words came out hard and direct. He had to leave, with no time for promises or plans. Emma felt the ground fall away from her, as the reality of a future without shared laughter or afternoons in the bookstore became crushing. The silence that followed was louder than any words they could have said. Their last day together was filled with forced smiles and memories trying to form before everything fell apart. In their final goodbye, as Thomas's eyes locked with Emma's, they both knew it would mark their lives forever. No letters, no formal goodbyes. Just the uncertainty of a reunion that seemed too distant to be real. The heat in Brighton felt more oppressive that day. Or perhaps it was just Emma's feeling as she realized that every minute with Thomas was numbered. He could barely look at her as he explained what had happened. The diagnosis had been a shock, and leaving was inevitable. Emma felt her heart tighten as if someone had crushed it in their hands. The silence that followed the news was heavy, almost tangible, an insurmountable barrier between them. Thomas turned his gaze to the horizon, where the waves gently broke on the sand. "I didn't want it to be this way, Emma. I didn't choose this." His voice trembled, the usual confidence gone, leaving a vulnerable man at the mercy of forces he couldn't control. Emma wanted to scream, to ask why he wouldn't fight for them, but she knew it would be unfair. He was fighting, just not in a battle that could be shared. The following days were a mix of conflicting emotions. Emma tried to maintain composure, keeping herself busy with tasks at the bookstore, but every corner of the city reminded her of Thomas. It was as if he were everywhere and nowhere at once. The smell of paint on his hands, his carefree smiles, the afternoons when the world seemed to pause, all of it was now a distant echo, a memory that began to hurt more than it delighted. On the night before Thomas's departure, they met for the last time on the beach where so many conversations and promises had been made. The sky was painted in a vibrant orange, as if it knew it would witness a farewell. Thomas tried to keep things light, telling stories and laughing, but Emma could see the sadness in every unsaid word. Time seemed to slip through their fingers, each second a memory clinging to the soul. "Emma, I will never forget this summer," he said, his voice faltering at the end. She didn't respond. She knew words wouldn't be enough to carry the emotion of that moment. She just nodded, feeling tears burn her eyes. The wind brought the sound of the waves, a melancholic song that matched what they felt. It was the end of something that had barely begun, and the unfairness of it all made it even harder. The moment of goodbye was as silent as the sea. Thomas stepped toward Emma and hugged her with an intensity that seemed to etch every detail of her into his memory. She closed her eyes and wished time would stop, that destiny would be kinder. But it wasn't, and the warmth of the embrace faded as Thomas stepped away, walking slowly down the sand until he disappeared into the darkness. Emma stood there, motionless, until the chill of the night made her realize she was alone. In the weeks that followed, Thomas's absence became a presence in itself. Emma tried to fill the void with books and tasks, but everything seemed pale in comparison. Deep down, she knew she had to move on. Life didn't wait, and neither could she. Days turned into months and months into years. Brighton continued its routine, and Emma, gradually, began to believe that what they had was just a brief, intense chapter of her youth, destined to be hidden in the heart where special memories are kept forever. The years passed like a constant breeze, carrying Emma and Thomas along paths they never imagined. Emma pursued her passion for literature and became a respected university professor. Her life was filled with lectures, conferences, and quiet nights spent losing herself in the pages of old books. It wasn't that she was unhappy. In fact, she felt a type of calm satisfaction that came with time. But there was a part of her heart that remained untouched, like a book never opened. Thomas, on the other hand, found an unexpected refuge for his art in the solitude of recovery. The initial diagnosis was less severe than he feared, but the treatment required time and patience. During this period, he poured himself into his paintings like never before, exploring themes that reflected his own struggles and resilience. The canvases he created were profound, filled with shadows and light that told stories without words. His name began to gain recognition, and galleries in small towns started to exhibit his works. Brighton became a distant memory for both, a place that only inhabited the furthest corners of their minds. Emma rarely thought of Thomas. He was like a character from a long-forgotten story. Her classes occupied her time, her students brought challenges, and on weekends she enjoyed the company of friends and literary events. Life was filled with small satisfactions, making the echoes of the past seem even more irrelevant. Thomas, now in the middle of his career, traveled to exhibitions and saw places he had always dreamed of. Paris, Rome, New York. All these cities carried pieces of his soul. But on particularly lonely nights, he found himself looking at one of his earliest paintings, one with the colors of a Brighton sunset and the outline of a figure that only he knew represented Emma. These moments were rare and quickly replaced by commitments and new projects. Decades went by and life continued its course. Emma turned 65, surrounded by friends and former students who admired her. She had stories to tell, many filled with laughter and adventure, but none marked by the raw emotion of that distant summer. She had learned not to cling to the past, accepting that certain chapters in life didn't need continuations. That's why, when she walked around the city or read under the blue sky, her mind rarely wandered back to that time. Thomas, for his part, had reinvented himself many times over the years. At 66, he was a renowned artist, but with a weariness that only age could bring. He liked to walk the streets of the cities he visited, watching life go by and finding inspiration in the simplest things. In one of those contemplative moments, he decided he needed a break. Brighton, he thought, would be an interesting place to revisit, not for nostalgia but to search for new angles and colors. Unbeknownst to them, fate, silent and unpredictable, guided them back to the same starting point. In a sudden decision, Emma resolved to spend a weekend in the city to reconnect with the peaceful scenery and the memories she didn't seek but that the city kept. Thomas, with a palette of colors in hand and an attentive gaze, walked the same street. The reunion as they turned a corner was unplanned, but the impact of recognition in their exchanged glances made time stop, and the viewer hold their breath, wondering what would come next. The unexpected encounter on the narrow street of Brighton caught Emma and Thomas off guard. For what felt like an eternity, they stood still, exchanging glances filled with decades of untold stories. The air between them was heavy, as if time itself had paused to witness the moment. Emma, with her heart racing, felt a wave of old, familiar emotions wash over her. Thomas, in turn, saw in Emma's features not just a memory of the past, but a life that had moved on without him. "Emma!" Thomas's voice was deeper and more uncertain than he remembered, echoing in the surrounding silence. She smiled, a hesitant smile full of surprise. "Thomas, it's been so long." The words seemed insufficient, but at that moment they were all they needed. There was a mix of comfort and strangeness in seeing each other again. Each marked by the lines of time reflected choices, laughter, and tears the years had brought. Without needing to say it, they decided that the moment called for a pause in their day. They walked to a nearby cafe. Sitting at a table by the window, the view showed the sea, familiar and constant, a silent witness to their memories. Thomas watched Emma as she spoke about her years as a professor, what she had learned, and the people she had met. He noticed that although she was more mature, she still had the glow of the days when they dreamed together. Emma listened as Thomas recounted his travels and accomplishments in the art world. He told stories with the same passion as before, but she detected a certain melancholy in his words. His eyes still had that restless spark but now seemed heavier. Each detail he shared reinforced the absence they had once silently shared. It wasn't a sense of regret but the realization that what they had was real, and in some way still a part of them. Between laughter and pauses, the minutes turned into hours. They reminisced about that summer in Brighton, the afternoons by the sea, and their late-night conversations under the stars. "Life takes us places we don't imagine, doesn't it?" Thomas remarked with a light smile. Emma nodded, feeling a twinge of nostalgia. There was unexpected comfort in hearing that, a confirmation that what they had, even if brief, still meant something. Their time in the cafe stretched until dusk. The silence between them was now lighter, no longer burdened by unspoken memories. However, the farewell loomed once more, like an unwelcome shadow. "It was good to see you, Thomas," Emma said, her voice carrying a softness he recognized. "Yes, it was," he replied, knowing that phrase couldn't convey the whirlwind of feelings that encounter had stirred. As they stood up, hesitation lingered between them. Both knew that if they turned away at that moment, they might lose each other in the years again. Thomas took the initiative. "Emma, how about a walk on the beach tomorrow? I think we need to see if we still recognize those waves," he said with a shy smile. The invitation hung in the air for a moment before Emma responded. "I think that's a great idea," she said, feeling her heart quicken. The reunion wasn't just a coincidence. It felt like the first step in a story that wasn't yet over. And the viewer, captivated, wondered how far this new chance would take them. The next morning arrived with a gentle breeze and the sound of waves breaking on the shore. Emma got ready with a restlessness she hadn't felt in years. She chose a light dress and left her hair down, as she used to do in her youth. As she walked towards the beach, she felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Thomas was already there, looking out at the sea, hands in his pockets and a contemplative expression. When he saw her, his smile came naturally, as if time hadn't passed. "Good morning," he said, and the simplicity of the greeting brought unexpected comfort to Emma. They walked side by side, initially in silence, listening only to the sound of the sea and the soft rustling of sand under their feet. Thomas broke the silence first. "You know, I never thought I'd come back here and find you after everything." Emma gave a small smile, keeping her eyes on the horizon. "Life has strange ways of reminding us what's important," she replied, with a tone carrying both wisdom and nostalgia. Their conversations flowed, alternating between memories and stories they didn't know about each other. Thomas spoke about his exhibitions and how some of them were inspired by Brighton sunsets. Emma, in turn, shared stories of the plays she wrote for the local theater, infused with touches of the tales they shared in their youth. The past seemed to blend with the present, creating a new layer of understanding and mutual admiration. As they walked, the beach began to fill with people, but for Emma and Thomas, the world seemed reduced to that stretch of sand. Emma's laughter echoed when Thomas reminded her of an old joke he used to tell. The sound was something he hadn't heard in decades, and the familiar warmth of that moment reignited something inside him that had long been dormant. "Emma, have you ever thought we could have had a future together?" The question came suddenly, catching her off guard. She stopped walking and looked at him, searching his eyes for an answer beyond words. "Thomas, for a time, maybe, but I accepted that life took us in different directions. I didn't let myself dwell on what could have been." He nodded, understanding, but a spark of hope grew inside him. Fate had brought them there for a reason, and he wasn't willing to let this opportunity slip away. The afternoon stretched on, and both felt closer than ever. They were no longer the young dreamers who fell in love quickly. Now they were two souls who understood the importance of time, forgiveness, and acceptance. The day ended with a golden sunset, reminiscent of the one that had united them decades ago. Thomas, with a subtle smile, suggested, "There's a fair in town tomorrow. How about we go together?" Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded with a smile that made her heart race. "I'd love that." The promise of another day together sparked something in both of them, a flame that, despite time's efforts, still burned. Their walk home was slow, and the silence that accompanied them was no longer uncertain but full of anticipation. The viewer, now fully engaged, wondered if this new chapter in their lives would bring more than just memories. There was something in the air, a feeling that this was only the beginning of a new story. The next day dawned with a light mist covering Brighton, adding an air of nostalgia. Emma prepared carefully, feeling a nervousness she hadn't experienced in a long time. When she reached the town square, she saw Thomas waiting by a flower stall. He wore a simple hat and a light shirt, looking like a traveler ready to rediscover the world. When he saw her, his smile lit up the gray morning. The fair was full of scents, colors, and sounds that evoked memories of their youth. They walked together, stopping at stalls, sharing laughter, and exchanging knowing glances. At one point, Thomas picked up a small hand-painted canvas and studied it in silence. "These colors, they remind me of the afternoons we spent on the beach," he said softly. Emma, touched by the memory, smiled. "Yes, they have a way of bringing everything back, don't they?" Their eyes met, speaking more than words could. As they explored the fair, Thomas noticed an improvised stage where a band was playing classic songs from the 70s. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting the melody take her back to a time when their dreams were bigger than the barriers of reality. "Dance with me?" Thomas suddenly asked, extending his hand with a playful sparkle in his eyes. Emma laughed, surprised but accepted. As she spun in Thomas's arms, she felt a lightness she hadn't felt since her youth. During the dance, Thomas made an unexpected confession. "Emma, for a long time, I thought what happened between us was just a beautiful episode in my life, something I'd accepted losing. But now, being here with you, I feel like maybe fate has given us another chance." Emma stopped dancing for a moment, looking into his eyes. The weight of those words hit her unexpectedly, and she realized that despite everything, her heart still had room for hope. "Thomas, we can't ignore that decades have passed," she said, with a mix of reason and emotion. "Our lives went in such different directions." He nodded, but with a determined expression. "Yes, but here we are, Emma. Against all odds, fate brought us back. Don't you think that means something?" Doubt and the desire to believe mixed in her mind. Logic wanted to prevail, but something stronger, the feeling that they were standing before a new opportunity, won out. The afternoon continued with fewer words and more silent gestures. They walked through the town, rediscovering places that once meant so much. The past and present intertwined, as if every corner and memory were part of a puzzle finally coming together. The fair, which began as a casual outing, had become a symbol of rediscovery. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, Thomas took Emma's hand. There was no rush, no exaggerated promises, just the recognition that time, despite everything, had brought them there. Emma smiled, feeling more alive than she had in years. "Maybe fate really does have its ways," she murmured, and Thomas squeezed her hand, a silent response that even after so much time, they were willing to see what came next. The following days unfolded like pages of a book Emma and Thomas were reluctant to close. Each morning was a new opportunity to rediscover not just each other, but also parts of themselves they had lost along the way. They strolled through the market, explored old shops, and lost themselves in conversations that ranged from art to life. The shared laughter and comfortable silences created a familiar atmosphere, but at the same time, there was tension in the air, an uncertainty that accompanied them with each meeting. One afternoon, sitting on a bench facing the beach, Thomas broke the silence. "Emma, have you ever wondered why life took us so far apart?" He didn't expect an immediate answer, and Emma, gazing at the waves, took a moment to reply. "I think it had to happen. We had our own paths, our own battles." She sighed, and for a moment, the sound of the waves was the only thing heard. Thomas nodded, understanding more than she realized. He too had questioned the reasons that had led him to leave and the choices they both made. But at that moment they realized that what mattered wasn't the questions, but the fact that they were there, together. "Even so, Emma, I don't want this to just be another chapter that ends. I want to know if you feel that this could be something new," he said, his voice full of emotion. Emma felt her heart race. For so long she had protected her heart, keeping it distant from memories and past loves. But now, there with Thomas looking at her with an intensity that reminded her of the young man she had known, she knew her defenses were starting to fall. "Thomas, I don't know where this will lead, but I don't want to avoid what I'm feeling anymore," she replied, a slight smile appearing on her lips. Emma's admission brought a relief Thomas didn't know he needed. They spent the rest of the day together, letting the sound of the sea and the changing sky be the only witnesses to their laughter and stories. The town, with its salty breeze and familiar alleys, embraced them like old friends, and each step they took was an invitation to rediscover what time had left in suspension. As evening approached, Thomas invited her to dinner. They sat in a small restaurant overlooking the sea, where the city lights reflected on the water, creating a perfect scene. Between dishes and smiles, Thomas took Emma's hand, holding it firmly. "I'm willing to try, Emma. No matter how many years have passed or what we left behind, I want this to be our chance to start over." The silence that followed wasn't one of hesitation, but of contemplation. Emma squeezed his hand, feeling the familiarity of that touch. "Then let's try, Thomas. No rush, no unrealistic expectations. Just us here and now." And at that moment, under the starry sky of Brighton, two souls that had once been lost found each other again. The love that had long been dormant now awakened, not as a distant memory, but as a renewed promise, ready to be written in new pages. In the days that followed, Emma and Thomas began to explore each other in ways they hadn't before. Every conversation brought new discoveries, revealing not just who they were now, but who they had become over the years they were apart. Emma realized that despite all the paths she had chosen, there was a part of her that still longed for this connection. Thomas, on the other hand, felt that Emma's return to his life gave new purpose to his days. One afternoon, as they walked through the city park, Thomas stopped and looked at Emma with a shy smile. "Have you ever thought about what it would have been like if we hadn't been separated?" She sighed, not with sadness but with acceptance. "I think we wouldn't have become the people we are today. And maybe we wouldn't have this chance to start over." The sincerity in her words made Thomas feel that, for the first time in a long while, they were living in the present without regrets. Their walks became more frequent, and small gestures gained deep meaning. Emma began to notice how each glance from Thomas, each touch of his hand, brought out a feeling of familiarity and safety. One night, during dinner at Thomas's house, he surprised her with a confession. "Emma, finding you again made me realize that life is more than achievements and solitude. I want us to know that from now on we're together whatever path comes." Thomas's words echoed in Emma for days. The weight of the decision was as strong as the excitement she felt thinking of a new life with him. The security that age brought made them see this as a unique opportunity, something many didn't have the chance to experience. However, both knew that this decision had to be made carefully, without rush or idealizations. Starting over at 65 was both a challenge and an adventure. One sunny afternoon, sitting on the park bench where their reunion began, Thomas turned to Emma with a gleam in his eyes that made her smile. "Emma, I know we're rediscovering this path together, but I don't want this to be temporary. I want you to know that I'm here for whatever comes. Marry me, Emma. Let's make this our new story, complete and without end." The proposal took Emma by surprise, and she felt tears well up, not from sadness but pure emotion. Emma laughed, a laugh that was a mix of relief and happiness. "Thomas, I never thought I'd say this after so many years, but yes, let's do it. Let's get married and live this love the way it deserves to be lived." The moment was sealed with a hug that said more than any words could express. The emotion was palpable, and the park, with its trees and children playing in the background, seemed to share in their joy. News of the wedding spread quickly among their friends and family. What had begun as a casual rediscovery was turning into a promise for the future. Emma and Thomas knew that what they had now was stronger than anything they could have planned in their youth. It was a love tested by time and distance, but in the end it proved stronger than any obstacle. And so, as the sun set once more over Brighton, they prepared for the day that would seal a love story that had withstood time and circumstances. The wedding day dawned with a clear sky and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of the sea. Emma looked at herself in the mirror and saw the reflection of a woman who had lived intensely. The lines on her face told the stories of a life filled with highs and lows, but her eyes sparkled like in her youth. In a simple, elegant dress, she adjusted the details and smiled, feeling a wave of emotion. Outside, the sound of the waves breaking on the shore seemed to welcome this long-awaited moment. Thomas stood on the beach, gazing out at the horizon. He wore a light suit that matched the scenery, radiating a calmness that came from the certainty that everything was right. The guests, friends, and family murmured among themselves, some recalling the couple's past, commenting on how life had taken them down such different paths, only to bring them together again. When Emma appeared, walking toward him, a reverent silence fell over everyone. Emma and Thomas's eyes met, and in that moment time seemed to stop. All the memories, the years apart, the reunions, and the conversations came together in one moment. Thomas felt his heart beat strongly, as if he were reliving the first day he saw her in the bookstore. Emma, on the other hand, felt a peace and certainty she hadn't experienced in a long time. In that moment, everything made sense. Every choice and every obstacle they had overcome had led them there. The officiant, an old friend, began the ceremony with words that captured the essence of what they shared. Today we celebrate a love that time could not erase, but only strengthen. The words sounded like an undeniable truth, deeply touching everyone present. There was a sparkle of emotion in the eyes of friends who knew their journey and understood how much that day meant. Holding Emma's hand, Thomas spoke his vows in a voice that, though trembling, carried conviction. Emma, our story was interrupted, but never forgotten. Today, I promise that every day from now on will be lived with the love and wisdom that only time can teach. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. She knew this moment was a renewed promise of love, stronger than at any other time in their lives. Emma responded, with a look that contained all the affection accumulated over the years. Thomas, you were the beginning of everything for me. Even when life separated us, the memories remained. Today, I promise that the next chapters will be written with love, patience, and joy. This is our new beginning. The guests watched the exchange of rings with smiles and tears, while the sea, with its eternal ebb and flow, seemed to bless their union. With a kiss that sealed the ceremony, applause and laughter echoed along the beach. Emma and Thomas, hand in hand, turned toward the sea, feeling the breeze and the warmth of the moment. Under the orange sky of the setting sun, they began to dance to the sound of the waves, celebrating not just the wedding but the life that had reunited them. The love that had long been dormant now shone with full intensity, promising days of peace, joy, and companionship. Reflecting on the story of Emma and Thomas, we realize that life has curious ways of leading us down unexpected paths. They fell in love in their youth, faced the pain of separation, and for decades went their separate ways, never imagining they would meet again one day. This narrative reminds us that time can be an unforgiving master, but also a generous one. What seems lost can surprisingly be rediscovered. Emma and Thomas show us that true love isn't a straight line. It's full of curves, stops, and new beginnings. In the end, life can offer a second chance, and choosing to embrace it with courage and hope makes all the difference. If you enjoyed this touching story and want more emotional content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on our next stories. Share this video with friends and family who believe in the power of love and the beauty of reunions. Join us on this journey full of emotions and inspiring stories.